We're going to be in Deuteronomy 23 and 24 today. Lynn quite often remembers a story of when she was a girl in her church back in McBain, and her and one of her friends got to go to Moody Bible Institute for I think it was a 1-week class, right, Lynn? 2-week class. So they're there for 2 weeks. And as you know, Moody is downtown Chicago, and they got there, and they said one night, they were in a second floor dorm room, and one night they heard all kinds of commotion. And they looked out the window, and there's this guy being chased by the police. And she said it was just like a movie, because the guy was holding a bag. It looked like a money bag. And he was running from the police, and they ran around, and I don't know if they ever saw what actually happened as far as them catching him or whatever. But isn't that funny to see something like that in a city? It reminds you of an old movie, old Keystone Cops type movie, that sort of a thing. But when you see that, you think of the guy was probably a thief. He had probably stolen something. And we don't like stealing, do we? Stealing's not a good thing, especially when people have stolen from us. But there's lots of other ways to steal things as well. Have you thought about that? For instance, and I just listed a number of things, no particular order here. Have you ever heard someone say, well, finders, keepers, losers, weepers, right? Didn't we used to say that as a kid? Wouldn't that infuriate you when it was something that you lost or something you sat down or misplaced, and then you see someone else that found it and they won't give it back? Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. I remember when I was a kid, it might have involved one of my toys. It might have involved a baseball that I had and somebody else picked it up. But you could steal doing that, right? Well, the right thing would be to say, if you knew who it belonged to, give it back to them, right? But that doesn't always happen. Another way to steal is, what about all the small print in a contract that you're involved in? Any of you involved in any contracts that have small print in them? Sure you do. I know at Du Bois, when we have guys sign their contracts before they take a piece of equipment, there's a ton of small print on the back, and no one ever reads that stuff. I always tell them small print's on the back. It says, bring donuts when you're done. I've got a few people to bring donuts, and so that's not, I always tell them I'm kidding, but we don't turn the donuts down either. But yeah, that small print, especially in warranties, right? How many of you have had something that broke down and you go and you take it back to try to get it fixed under warranty, and they say, I'm sorry, we can't do that. Maybe with your car, right? By the way, I saw a thing the other day. Alexander Graham Bell was the first one to talk on a car, and it said 5 minutes later, or talk on a phone, 5 minutes later, he got a phone call saying his car warranty was outdated. So, I don't know if that's true, but at any rate, yeah, you wonder, are they stealing? Did they put that small print in there to make it so impossible that you couldn't do it? Or like when you receive something in the mail and they say, save all the packaging in case you got to send it back. Well, who really saves all the packaging, right? Maybe you do. Maybe you've run out of space of saving all. But anyway, yeah, you wonder, that's a way sometimes that groups can kind of steal from you, make it so hard to claim a warranty or something of that nature, maybe. What about manipulation? Can you ever steal from someone using manipulation? Maybe you're not stealing a particular piece of material, something, but maybe you're stealing from them other things. Because you can steal more than just material goods. I remember, you know me, I love classic movies and so forth. I like the Muppets. I watch the Muppets. In Muppets Treasure Island, there's a scene where Long John Silver has finally been figured out by the other pirates, and they figured out that Long John is trying to cheat us. And so they give him the black spot. What they did is they tore a page out of a Bible. That was the only book they had. They drew a black spot, and then they gave it to him. Well, the black spot is a death sentence for a pirate. If the other pirates give you a black spot, that means you're a dead man. And here it comes. Well, they gave Long John the black spot. Well, what did he do about it? He manipulated them. He started making them feel guilty for putting the black spot on a page of the Holy Scriptures, as if he really cared about the Holy Scriptures. But before it was all said and done, he had them apologizing to him, and he said, okay, you're forgiven. You get how that works. So they were pirates. I don't know that you can complain too much about what he stole from them or they stole from him, but still, the idea is there. People use manipulation, don't they? And before you know it, you might be in the right, and they turn it completely around, and now you're apologizing to them, right? Yeah, that kind of a thing can happen. And they've stolen what maybe was rightfully yours, or whatever action should have happened, and they turned it around to manipulate it to get what they wanted, that kind of a thing. Have you ever told somebody, made a promise to someone, and they didn't see that behind your back you had your fingers crossed, right? Hey, it's too bad, my fingers are crossed. Or if they saw your hands, well, I had my legs crossed, doesn't matter, I don't have to do it. Yeah, people can be that way, can't they? There's lots of different ways to steal things. Well, we've been going through the book of Deuteronomy, and the way I've been approaching it is when Moses repeated the 10 Commandments back in Deuteronomy chapter 5, and now he's giving a bunch of rules and regulations. It appears to me that a lot of the groups of regulations match up with one of those 10 Commandments and so forth. Well, today, the 10 Commandment that he is looking at is going to be the one that says, thou shalt not steal. If you're reading it in the King James anyway. But the idea that stealing isn't there. Well, we're going to look at that because I believe there's a lot of other rules and regulations that Moses will deal out to them, and I think they all flow from this idea of thou shalt not steal. Okay? Before we do that, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I pray that you'd help us as we read the scriptures, help us to be able to apply them to our lives. And Father, to me, this looks extremely practical as these 10 Commandments are being applied in a lot of different ways. They cover much more territory than just the simple idea of thou shalt not steal. Help us to see that, and more importantly, Lord, help us to incorporate in our lives so that we would be people that would honor you and would be fair and respectable to the people around us. Thank you. I'm praying this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you see, as we've got an outline there, first of all, we have God-given rights, but we also have God-given responsibilities. And then we're going to see those ideas applied as we get farther on. But we're going to look at this idea. I think when the 8th commandment is given here, you shall not steal. And if you want to see it, it's back in chapter 5, verse 19. That it's meaning a number of different things. I think there's several ideas that are there. And the ideas have to do with rights and responsibilities. And I want us to just look at that for a minute. First of all, I believe it points to the idea that there is such a thing as personal rights. We all have personal rights. The things that belong to you are yours. Okay? The things that you are ought to have or be given to you are yours. And you need to get those things. That's why we all feel cheated when we have that car warranty, that we knew they said they'd warranty it. But then now that we're looking at it, they've got some weird small print in there letting themselves off the hook. Sorry, you didn't wash it one day last year and there was dirt on the paint, so you didn't keep your car up or something like that. And they can get away with it. Well, you have personal rights. And the first thing that you see in that idea of not stealing is the fact that you have property rights. There are property rights. And we as individuals, we have those rights. And that's why we see stealing as wrong. And that's why if someone steals, goes into your house and takes stuff that belongs to you, you could take them to court. They can get in trouble with that. And so we have rights. Now, I put a note in here that there are differences between individual rights and community rights. Communities have rights as well. I know I live up in Maple Forest Township, and we've got a park up there now. If someone were to go in and destroy our park, we just put in a nice lawn this last year, and we've got a pavilion that can be used. And if someone goes up there and destroys it, well, the community has the right to take them to court and to have that satisfied and have it repaired, that kind of thing. So there are community rights. But what I'm getting at here is we have rights of things that belong to us. We're not necessarily in a communal thing where everything belongs to everybody. Now, in some countries, they might live in that sort of a thing. I've often wondered what it'd be like on a commune in Russia or China or something like that. I must admit, I haven't studied it. I don't know what kind of rights they have, but surely that toothbrush that belongs to Slavic, it doesn't belong to everybody else. If he wants to use it, he can use it, right? And he's supposed to, I don't know. I don't know where they draw the line on that. But there are personal rights, and the Bible supports personal rights. I personally believe the way that our country is set up with the rights like that, it's biblical. It matches biblical. It doesn't mean that it has to be done that way, but the way that our country does it, I believe that's true. We have rights to the things that belong to us, okay? I can't just go out there and take one of your cars and drive off on it and do with it what I want. It's your car. And so you have personal rights as far as that's concerned. But by extension, those rights go even further than that. There are other rights that you have. Here in the United States, we have a phrase that we refer to that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I really see it in this passage as well. I think God is telling the Israelites here that the people of Israel have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we're going to see that as we continue going through this particular passage. Now, of course, it's all tinged with the idea that they're following God, and it's supposed to be under the way that God defines his holiness and the holiness he expects of us. And so there would be stipulations on how all that works out, and we'll see some of those things. But we have personal rights, that's for sure. Well, the commandment that says thou shalt not steal also comes with personal responsibility. Not only does that person have rights that I'm not supposed to steal from them, but I have the personal responsibility that I need to make sure I'm not doing it. You know, yes, they are protected for their rights, but I need to be responsible and not even become someone who's going to take that from them. I need to exercise self-discipline. And I need to exercise maybe even some contentedness and so forth, that I have what I have and I'm not going to take what belongs to them and so forth. So I need to use self-discipline. But there's other things as well. I need to respect them. I need to respect their rights and not trounce on their rights. There are people in our country that would say, wait a minute, it's all about me. It's all about me, and it doesn't really matter about them. What matters is, am I getting what I want? Am I getting my way? That kind of a thing. No, I need to have respect for them, and also I need to live properly. I think you can see that in this particular thing. As far as thou shalt not steal, there are certain things that are proper and respectable, and I need to do those. And we're going to see it as we look at some more of these rules and regulations that fall within that. I need to be a respectable person. One of the things is I need to be a person of my word. And we're going to see later, and Jesus even talks about it, but let your yes be yes and let your no, no. I mean, if you're the one offering the car warranty, if you tell them you're going to fix it when it breaks down, well, then when it breaks down, fix it. You know? If you tell someone that you're going to do something, you need to do it. Let your yes be yes. And if you say you won't do this, I promise I won't go there, then don't go there. Don't do that. You need to be a person of your word. And we're going to look at all that. I believe from this rule, this commandment, thou shalt not steal, we see that there are rights and responsibilities that spring up from that. Now, Jesus did kind of the same thing. I believe this is what Moses is doing. I believe Moses laid out the 10 Commandments under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And then under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he's applying that to their lives. And he's showing them that it's more than just 10 rules. It's 10 rules that affect everything else, that cause you to do these other things. Remember when Jesus would ask, what's the most important commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And then he said, and the second one's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, the 10 Commandments break down that way. The first 4 commandments are how you would love God. The second 6 commandments are how you would love your neighbor and treat them as better than yourself, or how you would want to be treated. You see all that. But then they break down into even bigger things. So I don't think that we're stretching the limit the way I've been looking at this passage so far with all these other things. And I think we're going to see it today. But Jesus did the same thing. Remember when Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount was talking about the various commands, and he said, you've heard it said, and he quotes one of the 10 Commandments, or one of the ways that the Jews were interpreting the 10 Commandments. And then he says, but I say to you, and he adds to it. For instance, when it talks about murder, you shall not murder. Well, of course, Jesus believed that you shouldn't murder, but he took it even farther. He said, this even goes into the rules of how you talk about people, how you abuse people with your speech. You know, you need to have the right attitude. Make sure that you're not calling them names. Make sure you don't hate them. Make sure all of those things. Jesus is relating it to all those things. That's exactly what I think Moses is doing here. When he talked about adultery, it wasn't just enough to say, don't actually just do the act. He said, you can't let that lust live in your heart either, because it's just like it. So I'm just making the point that that's how he's applying them and spreading those out. And I see Moses doing that here. We're going to see it as he deals with stealing and how it's applied. And I think it's applied in these areas. You have certain rights, and the people around you have rights. And you have certain responsibilities, and the people around you have certain responsibilities. Well, let's look at this passage, and this is actually a short enough passage this time that I think we're going to be able to read most of it as we go, but we'll read each one individually. How do we apply this idea of not stealing with the idea that there are rights involved and there are responsibilities involved? Well, let's begin in chapter 23 at verse 19. He says, "You shall not charge interest to your brother, interest on money or food or anything that is lent out at interest. To a foreigner you may charge interest, but to your brother you shall not charge interest, that the Lord your God may bless you in all to which you set your hand in the land which you are entering to possess." Okay, well, let's look at that. First of all, what's he getting at here? He's talking about not charging interest. This is not saying that you can never charge interest, obviously, because it says there you could charge a foreigner or so forth. It's not saying that you can't do business. I mean, if you were a banker, would you say, how could I be a banker in Israel? I would lose that. It's not even talking about that, and I'll show you what I mean in just a little bit. But there are other places where Moses has already talked about this interest thing, and he always put it in the context of dealing with poor people, people who were struggling. And those of you who come alongside and say you're going to help them and you loan them money or whatever, but yet you do it in a way that they can never recover. Let me just give you a couple examples. I'm going to turn back. First of all, you don't have to turn there because I'm going to go quickly, but write the reference down, I suppose. In Exodus 22:25, he says this. "If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a money lenderer, and you shall not charge him interest." And then he goes a little bit later into the book of Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 25, beginning at verse 35 and going to 37. He says, "If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him, like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God." And so he's telling them there, I want you to be careful that you're not taking advantage of the poor. And I think when Moses said this to the people, I think they would have got it. I think they would have had it within that context as they were thinking. So he is not saying that charging interest at all would ever be wrong, but the idea here is you've got a poor person. How are you going to deal with them? And it's about attitude. Remember, we're talking about the context of thou shalt not steal. Well, I think the attitude here is, instead of stealing from them, you need to be helping them. You need to be trying to help them. And is there any way that you're going to help? And he's talking about a brother here, talking about a brother Jew. If we wanted to put it in relation to the church, we'd say a fellow believer. How are we dealing with a fellow believer that has found themselves in a bad situation? Well, can we help them out? And you could lend them money. It doesn't say, by the way, that you can't lend them with expectations of getting paid back. But the idea is that you're not lending them money so that you can make money off of them. Here they've got a situation, they found themselves in trouble, and you've got a way to make money off of their trouble. And it's telling you that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Rather, you should make sure that you're not seeking a profit off of them. And in a sense, it's as if Moses is saying, you find this guy in a situation to where he's extremely needy, and you're going to find a way to make a profit of it. It's like you're stealing from him. He's your brother. Help him. Don't treat him as a business venture in that particular situation. I think that that's exactly what Moses is talking about here. So in this idea of not charging interest, it's the idea of you should have the mindset, your responsibility is you need to help your brother. And his rights is that you shouldn't put him in a position to where he's going to forever be in debt. And, well, we have that in our country, don't we? I mean, credit card companies make it so easy to get a credit card, right? And then how many of us struggle over a long time of paying it back? Well, part of it is our fault. We need to be wise in the things where we're borrowing. But they also need to make sure they're not doing it in such a way that they're making it to where we can never get it paid back. By the way, you might have noticed a couple different words here used. He used the word interest. This is back in Leviticus. But he also used the word usury. Usury was the idea of exorbitant interest. Interest that made it very hard to ever get it paid back because it just kept accumulating so that they could never really get ahead. That was the idea. So, but at any rate here, don't try to profit off of them. Rather, try to help them. Your responsibility in this case is to be a helper, not just a businessman looking for profit. Okay, so there's the first thing, charging interest. The next one in chapter 23 goes to verse 21, has to do with making vows before the Lord. He says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it will be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which has gone from your lips, you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. Okay? Now, there actually are some Old Testament passages that kind of deal with this. You have responsibility when it comes to these things. Back in Numbers chapter 30, he says this in verse 2. He says, if a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind him by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So in other words, you said you would do it. You need to do it. Someone raised the question, is this possibly stealing from the Lord? Well, you might consider that. I believe, who is it, Malachi maybe in the Old Testament talks about because the people said they would give to the Lord and they weren't, and he referred to it as stealing from God in tithes and offerings and so forth, that kind of a thing. But here is a case where someone gave their word that they would do this, and now you need to do it. Now, Jesus talked about this same thing in the New Testament a couple different places. He talks about it in the Sermon on the Mount, but he also looks at it in other places because the Jews got tricky, some of them anyway. They got tricky, and what they would do is if they borrowed money from someone, they would have to find some way to guarantee that they were going to pay it back. And so they would say, the one example that Jesus used, they would say, I swear by the temple that I will pay this money back. Well, okay, they're loaned the money, and then they don't pay it back, and the guy comes back and says, look, you told me you would pay it back, and the person says, well, if I would have said I swear by the gold of the temple, then I would have had to do it, because gold's important. But that was just a common vow, so no, I don't have to. You see, they would do that kind of stuff, and Jesus said, that's not right. In fact, Jesus said, you shouldn't even swear with an oath in that case. He's not talking about swearing using foul language. He's talking about swearing by an oath to bind yourself this way. Jesus said, instead, you should let your yes be yes and your no, no. If you say you're going to do it, do it. If you say you're not going to do it, then don't do it. But he said, you bind yourself when you say it. You need to just simply do that. And we find that later on in the New Testament as well. The idea that let your yes be yes and let your no, no. In other words, mean what you say and do what you say. Do it. And that's the idea here. So you have a responsibility. And if you entangled yourself as far as something to do with the Lord, then you need to do it. If you entangled yourself in other ways, and I believe that's what he's getting at back in Numbers, where he says on the one thing you can make a vow to do this to the Lord, but the other thing is you bound yourself with some oath. Whatever it is, you bound yourself. Do it. Do what you said you were going to do. You know, unless, of course, you said you would do some sinful thing, then you need to repent and back off of that. But that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about here that you bound yourself. If you're going to do it, do it. And that's the idea that Jesus says here. So be a truthful person. Don't, in a sense, find ways to steal people. Don't try to be tricky. Don't try to find ways to get out of your responsibilities. No, you need to do it. And so go ahead and do it. I even know some people in some financial ministries that have talked about the idea that even if you go bankrupt, you should try to find some way to pay back your responsibilities because you said you would. When you borrowed the money or when you got whatever it was that you had, if you bound yourself to it, you should try to do that. Now, in today's day and age, what they're finding out is that sometimes when you've gone bankrupt and you go back to the company and you say, look, I still want to try to pay this back, the company may tell you, we've already written it off as a bad debt. It doesn't even exist anymore. Okay, you're settled. They wrote it off. And that's the end of it. But sometimes you're taking money out of other people's pockets by doing that. So we need to be careful about those things. The real answer is don't get yourself in that position in the first place. Don't get yourself in that position to where a bankruptcy is going to happen. Now, sometimes you can't help it. Maybe you go bankrupt because of a medical thing. You get in some medical health crisis and the bills are just skyrocketing and you just can't help it and you're bankrupt. I get that. That happens and so forth. But we need to be careful that we're honest about it. We're not just looking for ways to get out of it. By the way, some of the wealthiest people in America, even Donald Trump has gotten himself in trouble because he uses practices like that in his businesses, and so do a lot of other wealthy people. They know that they can do certain things and claim bankruptcy, and then they're okay, and they get out of it, and they can move on. Hey, you got to be careful. We need to be careful that we, as God's people, aren't being that way. That we're operating the way we're supposed to be. That we're not stealing from someone else. And especially in this case, stealing from the Lord. Be careful about that. Well, let me move on, because in chapter 23, he goes to the next thing, beginning in verse 24 of Deuteronomy. He says, when you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes at your pleasure, but you shall not put any in your container. When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle on your neighbor's standing grain. All right, here's the picture. Of course, in those days, everybody walked. Most everybody walked anyway, going to and fro. And you had all these vineyards, you had these farm fields, and there were paths going by. As you're going by, if you want to grab something as you're going and eat it, you can do that. But you're not supposed to be grabbing stuff and putting it in your thing so you can go home and make jelly with it, right? You know, that's the idea. No, you're not supposed to be doing that. You should just take what you need as you go. One of the things that happened in Israel was that there were gleaning laws that told the farmers to be generous with this. And when they were harvesting, for instance, they were told, when you harvest, you go through and you harvest the grain, don't go back over the field a second time to pick up all the stuff that's left. They said, no, you harvest it and you get all that you can as you go, but then the stuff that falls to the ground is for the poorer people, the people who need that. And then you let them do that. Len and Whitney and I like watching some of the period dramas from England and so forth. And one of them, this particular town, was doing their harvest of wheat, and all the people in this poor village would follow behind, because that's how they got their bread for the winter. And they would do the leasing, as they called it. And they would get that last a little bit and pick it up. And they would allow them to do that. Well, God was already teaching the farmers to be generous in that way. But with all that said, now you got to define, what do we mean by being generous, and what do we mean by actually stealing? And here's the rules that were laid out there. Moses laid out. Don't take advantage of these other people's generosity. They are going to let you eat as you walk, and that's perfectly fine, and they have to let you do that. But don't be stealing from that. Don't take your kids and say, look, there's 5 rows here, let's all spread out and get as much as we can as we walk. No, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, you can eat some as you go, but no, you're not harvesting it. The farmer's harvesting it. So don't steal by wrongfully taking advantage of their generosity. And their generosity actually commanded by the Lord. So you're taking advantage of not only them, but you're taking advantage of what God's asking them to do. Don't do it. You need to be wise in that. And most of us would understand. We would get what that's talking about, right? We'd get if we're doing too much. I actually got to thinking about, how would we apply that kind of a thing today? How would we do that sort of a thing today? Well, I thought of a couple things. What about the last couple years in our country? Unemployment claims have been big, right? With the whole COVID thing, and people have been off, and they've been claiming and getting the extra COVID funds that are available. No problem. The government's saying you can do that, and it's legal for you to do it. You need to do it, but you need to make sure you're doing it right. I know plenty of people they claim unemployment, but then they work on the side and they say, look, you got to pay me by cash, because if I make too much, I can't get this. They're stealing. And you might say, oh, but they're stealing from the government, so it doesn't matter. It always seems that way when you're stealing from some big organization, right? And you think no one's going to feel it because it's a big organization. God knows what you're doing. God knows your heart. And if you're stealing, you're stealing. And if you're not supposed to make this, well, when you make it, then quit claiming this other. You're stealing, is what God says. That's basically what he was telling them here with these farm fields. What about senior discounts? A lot of us have gotten to the point where we can get senior discounts. Rich, I don't know if you've gotten there yet. No, you'll get there someday maybe. But, you can get senior discounts, but have you found ways to get around it and get more than what you're entitled to? What about going to a restaurant where they offer free refills? There's this one, Lynn and I like to go to Five Guys up in Gaylord. It's a burger place. Well, when you order your drinks, you can go back as much as you want to fill up your drinks. Well, what if we said, look, one of us get water and one of us get pop. So Lynn and I can share the pop, and that way we're only paying for one. You're stealing. And that's abominable in God's eyes. You might get away with it. Is $2.89 really worth it to you? Not worth it to me. Don't steal. Do what you're supposed to do. Now, that doesn't say that you can't give your wife a sip because she wants to see what it tastes like. But no, you know what I'm talking about. Don't do that kind of stuff. You know, pay what you're supposed to pay. Don't take advantage of other people's generosity wrongly in that way. And I believe that's what's getting at when he's saying here, do it. You're stealing. Thou shalt not steal. Don't do it. Now, the next one's a little harder to figure out exactly what he's getting at. And I'm not going to talk about what you think I might talk about, at least not for very long, because we don't have the time. But let's read the first 4 verses of chapter 24. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, when she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, then her former husband who has divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled. For this is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Now, we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks on this particular passage. This is the passage where they came to Jesus and said, is it right for a man to divorce his wife for any cause? This is the passage they were talking about. They took this passage. Some of the scholars, there actually is a couple different camps of the scholars within the Jewish household, and they were looking, and some of them were very, very liberal, and they said he can divorce her for any cause, and they say, you know, if she burns his toast, he can divorce her because he doesn't like it. That's the liberal side of it. There was a more conservative side that said no, only for sexual type sins, adultery, and actually that's what Jesus agreed with. Jesus agreed with that particular camp on this particular matter. But here's what I want to do. I don't want to spend time going into this whole divorce issue right now. I think it'd be worth going into some other time, but I'm not going to do it right now. But I do want to make a couple statements before we move on. First of all, I hope you notice the Lord expected or anticipated that divorces would happen. There are some people that say under no circumstances, under any way is divorce ever acceptable. I think they're wrong. I think they have to ignore too much that the Bible says and so forth. And I don't think that's what God is doing here. But God is anticipating that divorce will happen. And it's always been the case. You go all the way back to when they first got out of Egypt and they're going through the Exodus and they're given the laws and stuff then. They talked about it then. And it's always been a situation. And the Lord recognized that divorces were going to happen. Now, this particular passage doesn't demand that a man gives a woman a divorce certificate. The Bible always encourages couples to solve the problem. Solve the problems is always the best way. Remember, Jesus said that in the beginning it wasn't so. God only had Moses do this because of the hardness of your hearts. Well, God recognized that there's situations when you've got people live in a sinful world that sin's going to get in the way and it's going to wreck things. And so therefore divorce is something that is going to happen. And he recognizes that. Well, this is not a command to do that, but it's allowing it to happen. Okay, that sort of thing, because it can happen. Here's the problem. Remember I mentioned that one segment of Judaism that was the more liberal side? They took and they play around with the words here, and they've divided up the Hebrew words, the particular things. They recognize that, yes, because of sexual sin, divorces would happen, but they also played with the words and said, therefore, for any reason, this guy could give her a certificate for any reason. So they developed a thing called a divorce for any cause. Now, in English, it sounds like they're asking, Jesus, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? But that's not really what they're saying. You see, that phrase, for any cause, we would use the phrase today, no-fault divorce. A no-fault divorce is if you just want a divorce, you just get a divorce. You don't have to have a reason. You just get a divorce because you want it. But they use the phrase, for any cause. In other words, that was their technical phrase. So when they asked Jesus about a divorce for any cause, they were really asking him about this no-fault divorce law. Okay, so you got to remember that. That's what Jesus was responding to when they asked the question. So when they said, is it right for a man to divorce his woman using the no-fault clause, is basically what they were saying. And Jesus said, no, He said, except for adultery. I mean, he recognized sexual sin, which is what the conservative Jewish scholars did as well, and Jesus sided with them. No, I don't agree with the no-fault law. That's what he was saying. Now, there are other reasons why the Bible allows divorce. You think of Paul in the New Testament, he goes and he says, if, like for believers, if an unbeliever spouse wants to leave, the believing spouse can let them. You don't have to fight it. You can let them leave. You're not bound in that case. Again, it'd be better to solve the problem rather than break up the marriage. But if they're going to leave, then they leave. You're no longer bound because you've been abandoned. And it harkens back to another Old Testament rule back in the book of Exodus, where it's talking about if a wife is neglected so severely by her husband, she's not given the food she needs. She's not given the other necessities for life that she needed. She was allowed to divorce him. So they even allowed that. I don't believe Jesus was denying that, because that wasn't what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about the no-fault law. So with that in mind, Jesus and Paul would both agree that as far as divorce is concerned, if there's sexual sin, that's one reason to allow it. And if there's neglect to the point of even abandonment would be the severe form of neglect, then it's allowed. And so there were other reasons. And I only say that to encourage you, because I know, look, divorce affects everyone today. Divorce affects our church. Several of you have been touched by it, and it's a horrible thing, and you wouldn't want to go through it again. I know that. Okay, but we need to just be careful in how we're looking at this. It doesn't mean once a person is divorced, forget it, life is completely done. Like in this case, he says she can't go back to her first husband. Let's get back to that passage, and I'll tell you what I believe he's talking about here. Because this has to do, remember we're talking about thou shalt not steal. How do you put this within the category of thou shalt not steal? Well, you have rights and you have responsibilities, remember? That's how I think we need to look at this particular thing. And I believe that's what's happening here. You see, what happened in that part of the world sometimes, people found a legal loophole to commit adultery. They could say, I'm going to divorce my wife. Then go and have this affair, if you want to call it an affair, adultery, and be involved in adultery. And then when it's done, they could go back. Or maybe the wife could do that as well. Go be involved in adultery. And then when it's done, go back and then fix the marriage or whatever. Well, that actually happened in that part of the world and in other places and in other cultures. And it became a serious thing. They found a legal way to commit adultery, or a legal way to be involved what we'd call today as wife swapping. And Jesus said, no. Moses, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said, no, that shall not happen. That's why it was such an abomination. And so therefore, they made the law strict. If you do anything like that, you can't get back together. You're going to forfeit that. Hopefully it will act as a deterrent. We know that the Old Testament uses deterrents. God made certain laws strict so that it would deter people, make them think about it first, because you can't undo this once it happens. And so I believe that that's what he's getting at here. And especially in the case if one of the spouses was an innocent party, it's being stolen from them. Their marriage is being stolen from them because of the non-innocent party and how they're acting. And then now they want to get back together and make it all right. No, we've got to have a deterrent here. And I believe that's what was going on here. So there were rights of the innocent party, whether it was the man or whether it was the woman. They both had certain rights within this marriage. And you're not going to try to be tricky and find some way to legalize your sinful lust and do it. And that's what he was saying. You can't do that. So don't do it. I believe that's the point of what he's getting at here. And that's where they were going. So there are rights that have to be guarded in these things. Now, he moves on from there. And in verse 5, he mentions the rights of newlyweds. Look at verse 5. When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war or be charged with any business. He shall be free at home 1 year and bring happiness to his wife whom he has taken. Okay? And your different translations word it differently. I think some of them are kind of funny in the way that they say that. But the idea here is, look, they're newlyweds. They need to enjoy the joy of marriage for the first year. And because somebody else decides we're going to go to war with these other people and they're going to round up all the men and take them, nope, these newlyweds, they have rights. They're going to be able to enjoy the joy of marriage They're going to be able to enjoy getting to know each other as newlyweds, and childbearing was extremely important in Israel because of the way that the land was divided up amongst all the people, not just the wealthy people. And so there were inheritance rights, and this gave them the best chance to have children, to be able to do that. So God was protecting rights from them, and no one else had the right to steal it from them by making the husband go off to war, and then this poor wife lose her husband, lose the inheritance that her child would have had as far as the land and all of that stuff. So it was protecting. No one could steal that from them. Okay? All right, the next one, verse 6, talks about their ability to make a living. It says, no man shall take the lower or the upper millstone in pledge, for he takes one's living in pledge. The idea of a pledge is maybe you loan them money and now they have to promise to pay it back or whatever. Or maybe they had some other situation and you came along to help them with the other situation, but now they have to give you some sort of a pledge to say that they're going to return the favor. But what you can't do is you can't take their millstone. You know how important their millstone was? I looked it up. This isn't talking about necessarily those giant millstones that a donkey would pull around in a circle and would crush up the grain. But they had these little ones. They had like a rock bottom, that's the lower one. And then they had the upper one, and it might have had a handle on it. And they would turn it like this. And you could pour more grain into it, and you just keep turning it. And literally, they'd use it almost every day. You get up in the morning, and before you can bake bread and do the other things, you got to grind the grain and get the grain ground out, and that's what they would do. So by taking that, you're harming them. Goes back to the one about the poor and charging this interest on them to where they never can get out from under it. Well, here you're harming them. They can't grind their own food for their daily sustenance. And this is saying they have rights. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not saying that they can't give a pledge of some sort and guarantee that they're gonna pay it back. In fact, in other places it talks about the idea of you might take their cloak. Remember, sometimes they would wear a cloak around them. Well, that cloak was something that on the cool nights they would use it as a blanket. And you could take it from them during the day, but you had to give it back to them at night. It talked about it earlier in the Old Testament here, so that they could stay warm at night. The idea here is that God is protecting his people. Yes, you're going to do business. Yes, there's going to be things where there's going to be back and forth where you're loaning to each other or you're helping each other or whatever that might be, but you can't go to practices that are going to harm the other person. In this case, don't take their millstone. They have to still be able to make their bread. It'd be like you coming in and taking someone's oven. Hey, you can't have your oven until you get this taken care of for me. You said you were going to help me over here with this, and until you do, I've got your oven. Or I'm going to shut your gas off until you come and take care. No, you can't do that. God is protecting the rights of everybody, not just the people who have the financial means to do that. He's protecting even the poorest ones amongst them. And then the last one is verse 7. It says, if a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of the children of Israel and mistreats him or sells him, then that kidnapper shall die, and you shall put away the evil from among you. This is just, again, the rights of the individual citizens. Now, we could get into the whole thing. I know that there was slavery back in those days and even involving people from other cultures and other groups. And we're not going to take the time to go into all that, but the key here is you're not going to do that to your own people. It might be the way the world works back in those days, but you're not going to do it to your own people. So if someone does kidnap a fellow Israelite and then mistreats him or sells him away, or if someone does anything like that, we're not going to allow that to happen. In fact, it's so serious, God says they're going to pay with their life. It's going to call for the death penalty. That's how serious God looked at it as he gave these rules through Moses. So he's protecting the rights of the citizens in this way. Now, do you see how a simple rule like thou shalt not steal is applied in so many other ways? There's other ways that we could steal. Let's don't do it. There's other ways that we can be dishonest to get what we want. Let's don't do it. You have to respect the rights of others. You have to carry out your responsibilities. A free society works that way. And God was setting up the Israelite society, and he wanted it to work properly. Remember, Moses is telling them these things just before they go into the land and take possession of the land. You need to be a good citizen. You need to respect others. Don't be stealing from them. Don't find ways to harm them. And then you need to carry out your responsibilities. If you say yes, mean yes. If you say no, be no. Don't look for loopholes to get what you want. Don't look for ways to cheat out other people so that you benefit and get what you want. No, you need to be a good citizen. Thou shalt not steal. And the same thing is true with us. This doesn't change when we get to the New Testament. We're told the same thing. We need to do what we say. We need to keep our word. We need to let our yes be yes and let our no be no. We need to do all those things. We need to respect the rights of others and so forth. And we need to be careful about that. That we're not turning it around because we don't like something. I'll give you another example. We're citizens of the United States of America. And the United States of America gives people certain rights. One of those rights is to have different opinions. We need to respect that. You know, we're surrounded by a lot of people in our country that have different opinions from us on a lot of things. I mean, right now, our world is crazy, isn't it? With all of the sexuality laws and rules and all of that stuff. And it is so different from that. Well, we disagree with that, and we have the right to say that we disagree with that, and we have the right to operate within our churches the way that we do, but we don't have the right to go hammer them over. We don't have the rights to go and hurt them. We don't have the rights to do that. And I believe one of the problems is conservative Americans in decades past have been very vicious with a lot of those things. The Bible doesn't give us the right to do those things. Even if you can say God doesn't like that, God doesn't give you the right to pass out that judgment. He doesn't. And we need to be careful about that. We need to be good citizens. We need to be good neighbors. Yes, we still need to stand where we are, and we need to have our particular rules and regulations that we believe God has given us, and we need to live according to them. But we're not to be dishing out all kinds of retribution on those outside. God says, let the world judge the world. Remember, Paul said that at one point. We need to worry about it within the church. And then that way we could be better neighbors. We need to be good neighbors. We need to respect the rights of those around us. We certainly need to be people of our word. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that it instructs us in these things. And to help us, Lord, as we try to apply these things. Help us to be the good people that you have designed us to be. Father, help us live right so that when people do persecute us, they'll see our good deeds and give honor to you in some way, somehow. And I pray that we would represent you well. And it does begin here, Father. Help us to not be just about our own gain, but help us to be good neighbors with all those around us. I'm praying this in Jesus' name. Amen.